Hey Burns, what's happening?
Hello, Dick. How you doing this week?
Well, I'm still vertical.
That's always a positive.
Yep. You know what I wanted to start off with this week, because it's such a hot button issue, is immigration. And and you know, part of the problem is people don't have a clue about history of immigration. For example, the 1790 Naturalization Act excluded non-whites from becoming citizens. It also specified who could become a citizen. And then, you look at how did we come up with this policy? Well, starting in 1875, there were a bunch of things that were enacted to limit people coming in. You know, the Ellis Island thing, people with disease, people that were criminals, blah, blah, blah. But starting in 1900, the whole thing kind of changed and restrictions started to plummet. And, the question becomes why? Well, the basic reason is, if you look at it, is that we were looking for people to populate the new territories, and we were looking at workers. And the idea was, if you couldn't contribute, you didn't come in. And somehow, as time went on, all that tended to change. After World War I, there was a huge flow of white Europeans that came in. World War II, same thing. But they all basically had a skill. And then when you go into the wetback program under President Eisenhower, where we started to limit people coming in, but people don't realize on the flip side, we had the Bracero Act, where we brought in laborers to pick in the fields because Americans didn't want to do it. And as I looked at the whole history of immigration in the United States, and then of course we had the Chinese Exclusion Act after we brought them in to build all the railroads. The bottom line is, and what people don't seem to realize, is we were bringing in labor that we couldn't get the American people to do, or there weren't enough American people to do it. Now, if that's the case and it worked, and it did seem to work, maybe we ought to take a look at what is our immigration policy now. I did a lot of research, and I can't find anything that specifies what the current immigration policy is.
I can tell you what it is.
Yeah?
The Democratic Party wants voters, and they want people who are dependent upon big government, and in many instances are illiterate in their own language. Not so much as high school graduates in their own country. The Democrats are not looking for the best and the brightest. They're looking for poor people, people who are looking for the golden calf, so to speak, based on everything they've heard about this country, and particularly what happens under Democratic administrations. And we no longer have a smart immigration policy. To your point, if we need mechanical engineers, or we need electricians, or we need teachers, whatever the case may be, people with education and/or skills, people in the professions, or skilled labor. That doesn't seem to be an interest. The only place where there seems to be the residual effect of the former policy is in the high-tech business. And there's been a lot of screaming about that. So I can't tell you that all the people being granted visas to come into work in the high-tech industry are necessarily needed. I do read a lot of articles that they're displacing American workers, American citizens. But that's what I've read. I don't know if
Well,
how accurate that is. But the one thing I know categorically, from multiple sources, is that the open borders policy right now under Joe Biden and the way the Democrats have voted, as an example, to block Trump building a wall, is all about getting people from countries all over the world, particularly third world countries, across the border, who they presume, and people who typically do, vote Democrat, because they want the same one-party control at the federal level that they have, as an example, in California at the state level. And California is, a blue state, one of the bluest states in the country, and it has been inundated with illegal aliens, and by design. And most of the major metropolitan areas are still, to this day, sanctuary cities, which is preposterous, and that's what they're doing. So what you talked about, Dick, has been flipped upside down.
Well, the interesting thing is that we always had a purpose for our immigration policy. After World War II, for example, it was humanitarian. You had to put the ship of fools somewhere, and the other countries wouldn't take them, so we did. And we lucked out. We got the rocket scientists, the nuclear scientists, and all the others. But that was because we wanted the technology, and it was a good way to get it. What's interesting, though, is when you look at the Immigration Act of 1990, it changed everything. And basically, it increased the number of visas. And now I'm saying visas because that's important. These people coming in now, they're just releasing them into the country because they got no place to put them. They have no visas, no controls. The assumption is they'll come for their here, and that doesn't happen.
Right.
And so I was thinking, if we could get a visa program that worked, because I know a lot of people on visas, and we brought the people in jobs that Americans didn't want to take, everything would be hunky-dory. But until we come up with a program to get the skills that we want, the labor that we want, in other words, the old, what do I get out of it? If Joe Schmo comes into the country, what do I get out of it? Well, if he's going to pick grapes, I get a bottle of wine. If he's going to do my yard, I get the lawn mowed. I get something. But just letting people in, as you've said, willy-nilly, we don't get anything. It's of no benefit to the country, which is most important, but it's no benefit to the average American. And people need to realize that you just can't have open borders. Otherwise, you're going to end up taking everybody that nobody else wants, that has no skill, nothing to offer. So, I think the whole key is we need to retool, or at least enforce, the immigration policy of the Immigration Act of 1990. And I don't know who screwed it up, but it's definitely gotten screwed up.
Well, I would agree with the statement that it needs to be retooled. But I would also say that that's, in my view, totally improbable, a virtual impossibility. Here's what I think would part of a prescription that needs to be done in advance of any effort to retool. Number one is chase the Democrats out of office. I'm not just saying regain majorities in the House and Senate for Republicans. And by the way, there are Republicans that need to be chased. But all we'll have is a repetition. So often the Republics are gutless in pushing back on the liberal agenda of the Democrats, and the Democrats are categorical in stating why they're bringing these people in. I mean, they're forced to be. How can our immigration system right now, apart from your well-taken point that we're not being selective, we're not vetting, we're not bringing in people that provide a benefit to our country, and importantly, people who want to assimilate. And that's a key issue in my mind. The Democrats have a preoccupation with the term multicultural. Now, I have relatives or ancestors, I should say, who came in from Germany. And even as a little boy, they spoke German in the house, but English outside of the home. And that's what a lot of immigrants did. And that was all part of the pride of becoming an American and wanting to pass the citizenship tests and become an integral part of our country. That doesn't exist anymore. But
Well,
the greatest hypocrisy at the moment, Dick, and then I'll pass the ball back to you, is where does Joe Biden and the Democrats in the Congress and the blue state governors and mayors of Democrat-controlled cities in this country get off with all of their COVID mind control, body control nonsense? Meanwhile, back at the ranch, they insisted the border be wide open. And right now, statistically, about 20% of the hordes, the unwashed masses flooding across our southern border, have either COVID, the measles, the mumps, tuberculosis. I'll mispronounce it as a dengue, dengue, I believe, fever.
Oh, dengue fever.
Thank you. I mean, it goes on and on. Communicable diseases that we had pretty much eradicated are reemerging in our country. I know as an example that there was a big breakout of measles in Wisconsin.
Okay, hold on a minute though. Let me respond to it. See, we had Ellis Island, and if you were found to have a disease, they put you right on a ship and sent you back. That doesn't,
or they quarantined you.
Or they quarantined you, but that doesn't exist anymore. As
That's
far
right.
as Democrats and Joe Biden, they're not going to go away. So the issue becomes, how do we deal with it now? And I think the way to deal with it now is to come up with a consistent policy, which I think we did in 1990, and then enforce it. The problem is that the policies we have in place are not being enforced.
To my point, the Democrats don't want them enforced. I mean, Joe, we know for a fact, and I live here in Texas, that Al-Qaeda terrorists are commingling with your average migrants from Latin America, South America, Haiti, and coming across the border. I mean, the Border Patrol can speak to that. Now, if you think of 9/11 and you think of what's happened with COVID, it's insane actually, what we ought to be doing as a country is declaring a moratorium on immigration. And that could be hurtful to the people that want to follow the correct process. Now, my suggestion would be anybody currently in the pipeline be able to follow through on the legal pipeline to get into the country. We don't just say, you know, you've been filling out paperwork and spending money to become an American citizen for 2 years, and now we're cutting you off. But beyond that, I think you can't fix a problem with the magnitude it is right now without a moratorium. That moratorium might be 2 years, might be 4 years. I mean, there are better minds than my own to determine that, but that's what I think we need. And secondly, American people ought to wise up and put the right people in office. And another thing that might help, and these may seem, you know, very peripheral to the immigration problem as you discuss it, as you're discussing it, Dick, but I don't think so. I think they're damn important. They're integral. I think we need term limits.
Okay, Tito wants to come in. He's at your door.
I didn't know he was back. Hey, Pete, come on. He's here.
You know, one of the things I think that's important is you need to educate the American people. And right now there's a shortage of nurses nationwide. And that being the case, we ought to raise the number of visas for Filipino nurses. You know, most of our medical people that immigrate are basically from the Philippines.
Now that I didn't know.
Oh, yeah. But right now there is a mass shortage. We're bringing in nurses from the mainland just to staff our hospitals because we don't have enough.
Okay, but, and I'm not arguing your point, but I would just add this, because this is something I've been reading about, and I believe it's a situation not just here in Texas, but across the country. Due to this ridiculous Biden mandate, vaccination mandate, there are thousands of medical workers, nurses, and so forth who are quitting or being forced out. There are 2 or 3 highly regarded hospital networks here in Southeast Texas. And they've been firing people, giving them a drop dead date, and then firing them for refusing to get vaccinated. I mean,
Well,
medical people. And by the way, just so anybody watching our podcast, I think mandates are ridiculous, but I've gotten my 2 COVID shots plus recently the 3rd one, the booster. So I just want people to understand that I'm not somebody who's refused a vaccination, but I made the decision based on my health and age, not because, you know, the mayor told me to do it or my senator told me to do it, or God forbid, Biden. I wouldn't do anything Biden told me to do.
well, you know, that's all well and good. But on the other hand, I figure that medical people, particularly those that are, you know, response, I guess they call them response people or whatever, that deal with the public, need to be vaccinated. And if they don't get vaccinated, as it used to be with the polio and all the others, you have to get rid of them. You can't have them running around. And you would think that they would understand that, being medical people. That's another thing I don't understand. You know, we went through polio, Hong Kong flu, SARS, measles, mumps, smallpox, and everything. And we all managed to get on board because we saw it as a patriotic thing to do. But that takes me back to my point about patriotism seems to have gone down the drain.
Well, I believe it's Project Veritas just in the past couple weeks came up with a tape recording of Pfizer scientists. By the way, the vaccine I got for COVID was manufactured by Pfizer. But the Pfizer scientists were saying that, you know, I want to say this properly, but your own immune system, if you've been exposed to COVID, exposed to it or had it, is in almost all cases superior to what the vaccines can do. So what I've heard people in the health community who have refused to take the vaccines are saying, hey, we've been on the front lines for a year and a half. They're saying I've either had it or I'm exposed to it every day. And, you know, you can take a test now to check your immune system. My immune system, and I believe yours, Dick, is compromised. So, you know, not all immune systems respond in the same fashion, particularly if you're older or you have some serious health issues. So I don't think it's an unpatriotic thing any more than I think parents who say to that damn Dr. Fauci and Joe Biden, you're not going to immunize my 5-year-old against COVID because according to statistics, he has less than a 1/10 of 1%, he or she, less than a 1/10 of 1% chance of needing to be hospitalized due to COVID.
Well, yeah, but the deaths so far in 2021 already exceed 2020. You know, so that's all well and good, but I think, you know, as a non-betting man, you know, it's a crapshoot.
Well, if the deaths
It seems to
exceed,
work, and it seems to be the only thing that works.
well, I don't know if we're veering off course. We have a gentleman's disagreement, I guess, on that point.
Okay, well, we've got 7 more minutes. Switch topics.
Okay. Well, I've been giving this a lot of thought and talking about it to friends and people that read my Facebook page, which is predominantly political. And I just want to make the statement that there used to be a time in this country where there wasn't such a gulf between a Democrat and a Republican. There might be on a particular point of policy, but you know, if you wanted to vote Republican or you wanted to vote Democrat and the other party's candidate won, you might have been unhappy for a week or two, but then we just got back to being Americans. There might be a particular piece of legislation we're not happy with or a policy, but for the most part, you know, and I often use this as an example, but if you had a John F. Kennedy or a Richard Nixon, you could live with either one. I think that's been less and less the case. You know, in the last few decades, Jimmy Carter, a terrific man, spiritual man, just a nice individual, somebody you'd want as your neighbor. Damn sure didn't want in the Oval Office. And it's hard to believe because he had an absolutely excellent education, but he was a disaster. And Biden is Jimmy Carter on steroids. So elections more and more today, because of the advent of the radical left, my view, among them anarchists, communists, avowed socialists.
Bartenders.
Elections have tremendous consequences now. And I don't think it's unfair or impolite to hold people who voted, as an example, for Joe Biden accountable. And how do I mean accountable? I'm not saying we fine them or throw them in prison or ostracize them from the neighborhood, but I don't think we should be shy about saying that the decision they made to pull the lever, and of course they didn't have to pull a lever because of all the mail-in ballots and the stuffing of ballot boxes that went on, but hold them accountable. What were you thinking? Because one thing about Biden's campaign, which was basically non-existent, and with the media supporting his ridiculous campaign of hiding out in a basement, it became all too apparent what his views were. Now, he was paraded as a moderate, but he talked about open borders policy in the debate. Now Americans are polling that is the number one issue in this country. The terrible immigration issue, which we've just touched on, open borders policy. Biden made that clear in the debates. So now we're aghast at what's happening. Well, whose fault is it? Well, yeah, it's Joe Biden's fault. It's Kamala Harris's fault. She's a loser. She was appointed border czar when the thing blew up, and she's done anything but work on that issue. But I say you got to add someone else to this blessed trinity, and that's the Biden voter. Look at what's happened to this country, and what's the antecedent of Biden's dismal record as president the first 9 months? It's the person who voted for him. And that would be my comment, Dick.
Well, but see, now you're agreeing with me. I said the person who's responsible are the people that voted. And they voted, I think, and I forgot which president said it, it's the economy, stupid. People are so self-centered today that they can't look at the big picture. Those are the same people that don't want to get their vaccine, the same people that want to continue their child care payments and everything else. And yet, if we continue on the road we're going on and we default, all the stuff that they've been hanging on to is going to go away anyway.
Joe Manchin, who is the Democrat from Virginia and one of two Democrats in the Congress who has been pushing back very hard on the $1.5 trillion infrastructure bill and the $3.5 trillion human infrastructure bill. I mean, he's been under tremendous pressure from the Biden administration and the left. He said here this week, and I'll paraphrase, I think this is fairly close to how he put it, but he said, I don't want a dependent society in our country. I want a rewarding society. And there's a huge difference. A dependent society are people who look to the government for anything and everything. They want to be, they want to, much like the illegal aliens, a huge social safety net to make sure that, I mean, they propose things like guaranteed income as an example. It's not just enough to get welfare. Now they want a guaranteed income. Whereas what Manchin is saying, this is my interpretation, he's saying, let's reward people for their industry, productivity, intelligence, work ethic, you know, the values that made our country what it is today. And,
Well, that's what immigration policy used to be. If you had a skill, you came in, and realizing that there were certain ethnic things one way or the other, but that was the bottom line throughout history. And we've totally gotten away from it. We have a green card, it's actually vanilla colored, but we have a card that allows you to come in if you have a skill, and it gets renewed periodically. And it used to be that if you didn't check in, out you went. But we don't have that anymore, just like we don't have any more time.
you handled that real well.
Thank you.
That was pretty smooth. Okay, if the sand is run through the half-hour glass, I'll bow out.
Okay, talk to you next week.
Okay, you take care, Dick.
Okay.